Hello and welcome to Tête-à-Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest today is Hicham El Alaoui. He's the cousin of the king of Morocco Mohammed VI, and he's also a lecturer at the University of Berkeley in California, and he's the author of a book called Pacted Democracy in the Middle East. Thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for hosting me.
So your book is a comparative study of the Arab Spring in two countries, Tunisia and Egypt. And you explain in the book that the process of democratization was successful, at least initially in Tunisia, while it failed in Egypt. Can you tell us why those two countries had so different trajectories?
The Tunisian transition in its wholity has failed, but it did reach the level of electoral democracy, and as such, it was a success, a relative success, one from which we can learn some questions. Now, I believe that the answer is structural. In the case of Egypt, there was a disparity. Disequilibrium between the Islamists and the secularists, and there was the presence of the army, which distorted the political game and the political pacting. While in Tunisia, there was more parity, and there was no equivalent to a tutelary force, which was the army of Egypt.
Right. You say that in the case of Tunisia, because there was a kind of balance of power, the Islamists were strong, but not as strong as in Egypt, it worked in the end. And so you conclude from that there is a possibility for Islam and democracy to coexist. Many beg to disagree. Why do you think the Tunisian example is proof of that?
Well, the problem is not with Islam. The problem is with the interpretation of Islam. And Islam is a faith. Islam is a prophecy. But the question is how people interpret that policy, and what is the exact interaction between the different actors during the moment of the transition. And yes, there is disparity in Tunisia that there wasn't elsewhere in Egypt. And the Islamists were more pragmatist. There was less dogmatic and less exclusionary of others. This is why the transition was able to proceed and was able to institutionalize in its first phases.
Right, but the leader of the Tunisian Islamist party, Rached Ghannouchi, at some point, and you describe it in the book, he made an agreement with the secularists whereby politics and religions would be separated. Do you think that this was indeed really what he believed, or this was a trick to fool the Tunisians and the opposition?
This cannot be a trick. If Islamists relinquish its raison d'être as having the reference to Islam and Sharia as the principal source of laws and the principal anchor of a constitution, then there is no reason for an Islamist party to call itself an Islamist party. This was by no means a trick. This was a concession. And concession in politics have nothing to do with ideology. They have to do with realpolitik, with the balance of power, and they have to do with bargaining. And that's the argument of the book. There's nothing in the essence of Islam that prevents democratization. If we look at it as a retrograde philosophy, and that's what a lot of Orientalists see Islam as an ideology, then there is no way to democracy. But if Islam is a faith and people live their faith in different ways, depending on where they are in the world at different times in the world, then that becomes an entirely different system of religiosity. And that's the approach of my book.
Right. But if you look at it from now, clearly the Arab Spring is no more. Most of the countries have followed the Egyptian way rather than the Tunisian path, at least the initial path.
Yes, but they have failed not because there's something intrinsic in Islam that have made it fail. They have failed because the revolutionary forces or the forces of change have sat back and have just been content with watching the process unfold as people who observe and not people who participate. Secondly, And that's basically the problem from Morocco all the way to the Gulf. And the second problem is there has been an enormous geopolitical intervention from certain Gulf countries that have made the process derail. So it's
in Egypt, clearly.
Clearly in Egypt too, less so in Tunisia.
How do you explain what has happened since in Tunisia? Kais Saied was elected democratically, by the way. But since then, it seems that he has decided that authoritarianism, as you have yourself described, is a better way of functioning than democracy. How do you explain that?
Kais Saied is a populist par excellence. He has basically not denied the existence of democracy. He has taken it hostage as a populist, based it on his charisma, and basically has led a political program that blames elites for the ills of the country and has accepted to enforce only the vertical aspects of democracy, meaning the referendums, elections, and in a way that serves his rule and not everything else that has to do with the countervailing forces that exist for horizontal accountability in the country. So he's a populist by excellence, which is another kind or another type of authoritarian rule.
Right. But how do you explain? You said, the political forces of reform stood by, didn't really plunge into the political sphere. But how do you explain that in most countries in the Middle East and North Africa, there's no democracy, and by far?
We have to come back to the will. Democracy it comes with luggage now, and regretfully, I mean, it's still there, and we have to talk about it as such as still an ideal, but it comes with ideological luggage. It comes with the idea of Western encroachments and so forth. Let's talk about political participation and emancipation.
Right.
The dream and the will for political emancipation is very much still there. What you have is different regimes falling back into the authoritarian pattern for structural reasons, for different reasons. In certain areas of the world, you have petroleum rents, like in Algeria. In other areas of the world, you have deep institutions with rooted legitimacy that have traditional rule, like in Morocco. And the opposition in Morocco during the spring was not about uprooting the regime; it was about reforming the regime, and so on and so forth. So one must not generalize. One must look up at the specific historical and structural conditions of any country, and it's a different story in different places.
Right. Let's talk about the monarchies. Obviously, they're still in place, be it in your home country, in Jordan, or one might say in the Gulf. I mean, is there any hope on the horizon? You've advocated for a long time for English-style constitutional monarchy in your own country, and this has probably caused you some problem with the ruling family. But is this still a kind of pact that could, or maybe should, in your eyes, happen?
Well, it caused me a lot of problems. It still does, but these problems are welcome when you carry convictions and when you have strong views, provided that you express them respectfully and you express them knowing that there are other dissenting opinions out there. Again, each country is specific. Each country is specific. But in general, these monarchies are respected and revered. They play an important cultural role. They are an anchor of stability, and hence citizens want to work with them and not against them. That's an important nuance. In the Gulf, there's a different set of circumstances that have to do with enormous rents and enormous resources from hydrocarbon resources, which makes the imperative or the pressure on democracy much less. In Jordan, you have the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict. You had the conflict with Daesh, and all these dampened democracy in different ways. In Morocco, you had a smart maneuver around the new constitution, which did offer certain venues for change, but which was not picked up or exploited by the political actors, and so forth. You are basically still on the wind of that, but what comes in the future, we don't know.
You mentioned the Palestinian issue, and that's my last question. Morocco is one of several Arab countries that have normalized relations with Israel back in 2020. Since the beginning of the war in Gaza, this has created tensions. However, none of those countries, including Morocco, has cut ties with Israel. Is this a problem in your eyes?
Well, if you're asking my opinion as a Moroccan citizen, yes, it's a problem. It's a problem because I think there's a differentiation between embracing our Jewish citizens from Moroccan heritage because of their belonging to our country and having a general posture of tolerance toward Judaism and Judaism. It's another thing of supporting or giving legitimacy to a specific government that is on the far right and that is mistreating the Palestinians in every sense of the word. But again, this is my voice among many others. I'm just one Moroccan among 40 million.
Hicham El Alaoui, thank you very much for being our guest here on Friends 24. And thank you all for watching this edition of Tête à Tête.